Well, I want to try and get a few things in perspective in this report. Simon Pressley from Propertyology will join me in just a moment. There is so much publicity about coronavirus, about its impact, not only on the economy, but what's it going to do to property prices? Well, I guess we've got to get it into perspective. And one thing that Simon does and his team at Propertyology very well is they do actually get things into perspective, and they can show them quite graphically, which is what we're going to do in this report. Simon joins us. Simon, thanks again for your time, and thanks for all the work you've done on this report. It's fantastic.
My pleasure, Kevin. Yes, it's something that we've heard a lot of in a short period of time, but we're going to hear a lot more of for several months, it would appear.
Okay, well, let's try and get this into some perspective. Let's bring up our first slide, which is headed up perspective. Talk me through this one, Simon.
Yeah, and look, I'm no medical expert. I'm a property expert, but what we're talking about is the potential impact of a medical health risk on a property market. So perspective is important. These are some round figures sourced from official data. We've got about 160,000 people that die in this country every year, and we don't like talking about death, but that's what coronavirus, where all this panic has come from. 300,000 people in a rough calendar year, Kevin, as we catch the flu or pneumonia. I was one of those 9 months ago. I couldn't work for an entire month because of pneumonia. So it's real, but lots of things to do with our health are real. Heart disease is the biggest cause of death. Flu and pneumonia related diseases killed 4,000 people in Australia last year. We've had 3 Australians die of coronavirus. So yes, it's serious. I guess if anyone can lose a life, it's serious. But one of the official things that I've read that I think should be leading the news story is that the reality is most of us will catch this thing. And plenty of us that do won't even know that we've got it. In fact, apparently children will catch this disease and you won't even know that they've got more than a cold. But this is serious because those who have health vulnerabilities, it's serious for them. So that's the perspective.
Okay, well, let's move to the second one, because we don't want to spend a lot of time on the medical parts of this because it's not really our role or not what I want to do in this, but I think we've got to keep it in perspective. Let's bring up our second one, where you talk, and I think it's very good advice here about leading by example.
We've got to be calm. I mean, from the Prime Minister down, all the important people we need to be listening to are saying that, but I just don't know that that's what we're doing. Stories of, people fighting in shopping centres over toilet paper is not behaving like mature adults, is it? And that's what we need to do. And I think if we need help behaving responsibly, any adult who's got children or whether they're someone else's children, just have a think about what they're observing and how this might affect them, not just now, but their personality and their emotional development for years to come. Be calm. This is the flu. So let's just behave responsibly and not panic.
Yeah, it's a virus. So, all right, well, let's get off the medical side of it because I'm not comfortable talking too much about it because I don't really understand it, to be quite frank. But I do want to push this across to property, which is what we're all about. Our third slide starts to walk into that area. Property market Armageddons is what you've headed this one. And you've obviously shown us here over a rolling period of time what can happen to the market with certain things that occur.
Yeah, so I guess as we often do when there's a new one-off event is go back through history and see if there was a similar event before that we can learn from. In Australian real estate modern history, we've had the SARS virus 2002-3 and we've had swine flu 2009-10. When we were in the moment, I don't know it was as dramatic as now, but there was no doubt there was some concern around those. But as there will be with coronavirus, it come and went. And when we look at the actual official data, what happened to property markets during those 2 big global viruses, it actually had zero impact on property markets. And there are some other significant events over the last 20 years that we put in this graphic as well. The biggest of which was, of course, the GFC, the biggest economic global downturn in the history of mankind. Whilst that affected the broader Australian national economy, each individual town and city has its own microeconomy, And generally speaking, real estate markets held up very well right throughout Australia during the biggest economic downturn in our history. Our two biggest markets, Sydney and Melbourne, we put in this graphic. And the green line being Melbourne, Sydney being blue, shows the change in median house prices. The biggest downturns have actually been caused by oversupply. Sydney and Melbourne have just recently come out of those downturns caused by oversupply, or local economic conditions, and they always had the biggest impact on property markets. So there's nothing we can look at on history, Kevin, for anyone to be panicking about what's the value of my home going to do. What's the value of my investments going to do?
Yeah, I do think, and you're exactly right, I agree with you totally. I think one of the impacts that we need to be aware of is the supply of building materials, which I think will probably have an impact on the amount of homes we can build, which has a positive effect on prices. So if anything, I'm not an economist, but if anything, my brain just says, well, I can't see prices actually going down because of this.
No, and I think where the fear potentially has come from is recession has been raised. That should not be a surprise to people. 12 months ago, I personally was on this show saying Australia could actually go into recession. Now, that wasn't because of the coronavirus. That at the time was because of APRA not making credit available. The big nasty word recession does throw fear into people. Just this week, arguably Australia's most respected economist, Bill Evans from Westpac, he pretty much echoed Propertyology's statement and said he thinks that the first two quarters we will have a negative economic growth as a nation, but over the next 12 months, he thinks it will be positive. Now, 2 consecutive periods of negative growth constitutes a recession. Businesses also have 6-month periods from here to, from time to time where they don't produce a profit, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad business. And Australia certainly does not have a bad economy. There will be stimulus that will come out of this, Kevin. At the moment, we're focusing on quarantining to minimise the contagion. When we get on top of that, there will be a lot of stimulus. We're already talking $10 billion. That's just in Australia. You wait till you see what happens in China. There will be an enormous pent-up demand for all these goods and services that human beings need every day that will be released in spades. So I think this is a short-term thing.
Okay, well, let's go to the final one, which is what we should always be focused on, and that is the fundamentals. And this obviously is what will have more impact on the property market, Simon?
Yeah, so I'm talking here at a national level. Yes. Most locations in Australia, vacancy rates are already very tight and falling. Let's not forget, what is property? The fundamental purpose of it is shelter. We need it all the time, including during a coronavirus. So demand for shelter to rent is already at stress levels in lots of parts of Australia and tightening. Housing supply, you've already touched on, Kevin. Large parts of Australia have had a couple of years of significant falls to building approval volumes. That's already part of our fundamentals, right? If anything, I think that I agree with you, the coronavirus, we're going to see less construction of housing, so less supply. A credit supply is very important to property markets. It's had a significant impact on the downturn that Australia had the last couple of years. That is relaxing. Banks have a very healthy appetite for real estate as an owner-occupier, first home buyer or an investor. Our household budgets, we have more money in our budgets because we've had tax cuts within the last sort of 6 or 9 months, and we've now had 4 interest rate cuts in about 9 months, so we've got more money in our household budget. These are fundamental things that are here with or without the coronavirus. We've got a very low national unemployment rate and producing about 400,000 jobs last calendar year. There will be a lot of stimulus, as I said, and our population continues to grow by about 400,000 people. Now, a month ago, you and I were talking about the best property market conditions we've seen in a decade because of these fundamentals. Those fundamentals haven't changed. What we believe is going to happen is a reduction in buyer activity during this period of time, a couple of months, whatever it is, and then a big surge when people realise actually this is all okay, the fundamentals are good, and they'll be transacting in property. those who are looking for an opportunity will be the ones who are buying now when there's lower buyer activity, and when the seagulls come out and fight after the chip in a few months' time, that will really ratchet up prices because the fundamentals are absolutely rock solid.
Yeah, I think you've only got to look at what's happening on the stock market to see how many people probably will find property a much more robust and reliable investment method. So it's going to be really interesting to watch how this unfolds, Simon. But mate, thank you very much for pulling all this into perspective and giving us another insight. I really appreciate your time. Simon Pressley is from propertyology.com.au. Thanks, Simon.
No worries, Kevin.